Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. Now a lot of people have been very impatiently waiting for the guides for Korean challenges, and this time around I'm actually probably going to start from the ones that are most demanded and then figure out what to do with the rest ones. I might just combine several Realm of Legend ones in one video or something similar to that, but a lot of people have definitely been asking me for Abyss guides specifically for Korean challenges. So what I'm going to do today is going to go over exactly what I did, what was my team, how many revives and everything else I used, why I did what I did, what path I took, all that stuff, and then I'm going to kind of recommend alternatives. Even though, keep in mind that obviously I'm not sure whether what I did was the best way to do it, and I'm sure that there will be some things that I either don't know or oversee, and a lot of this is kind of like personal preference and roster availability and things like that. But I'll do my best to guide you through. So first things first, let's take a look at the Abyss map as it stands, normally. And the truth is, this regular Abyss map, doing path 1, in my opinion, is a quite silly decision. Number 1, because it's longer than it has to be. And number 2 is because there's a Mephisto that can be quite annoying. And also because of Captain Marvel is there, and Captain Marvel is basically like another collector fight, more or less. So I think it's quite silly to purposely walk in here without Mystic Champion. And additionally to that, we have Thing, Omega Red, Quake, Mephisto, Medusa, Captain Marvel, Ghost, and Iron Man Infinity War. That's like 7 fights. When you alternatively and go this way. This is the path that I did for every single one of my Abyss runs, because it's much quicker and it's much easier, and it's less fights. Instead of 7 fights that are in path 1, you end up doing Darkhawk, Luke Cage, Old Man Logan, Havoc, and Dormammu. Darkhawk pretty much always is 1 shot or 1 revive for every one of the 3 challenges. Then Luke Cage, I soloed on 2 different challenges. On this challenge, it could have been 2 revives if I knew what I did with Strife initially. And then Old Man Logan is again pretty much always a solo. Havoc is like 1 revive. Dormammu can be a solo too, opposed to dealing with all of these tricky fights and throwing revives away, especially Captain Marvel. So this is the path that I did for every single challenge. And I obviously built my team in order to be able to do these fights very efficiently. So I'm going to go over my team exactly and the reason why I played it the way I did. So my team, right, we're going to take a look at this one. So my team is Magneto, Colossus, Strife, Professor X, and Apocalypse. I actually didn't pretty much use Professor X at all, aside from gaining charges with him. The reason for it is because I had more revives, and revives are easier to farm, quicker, comparatively speaking, to potions. Potions, well, I had less of potions. I was running fairly low on potions at that point already. I had plenty of revives. And also it's easier, in my opinion, to replenish revives. So because of it, I was running with Liquid Courage Double Edge. The synergy with Professor X and Colossus was super important. And vast majority of the fights, I think pretty much all but one, were done with either Magneto, Strife, or Apocalypse. And they all can be done very successfully with Magneto, Strife, and Apocalypse, especially if you kind of know what you're doing. A lot of the revives that I did waste, quote unquote, was me learning the fights that I hadn't done before. You can obviously run alternate teams that I will suggest later on, especially if you don't want to run Liquid Courage Double Edge, in which case Colossus is absolutely not needed. And then we're going to talk about what we can bring in instead. I don't think Cable is necessarily worth bringing, in my personal opinion here, because you can just do shenanigans quite quickly with Apocalypse and a couple of revives to gain all the charges you want in the world. Right, so this was my team. Let's go back to the path itself, and let me explain it to fight per fight. So we're starting with Darkhawk. Darkhawk is a fairly easy one-shot with Magneto, but I actually left him with a couple of percent health there, so I can finish out the fight with Professor X. So you want to get him to like 1 or 2% health, ideally, and finish the fight with Professor X to gain a charge on Professor. And Luke Cage actually can be done with like 2 revives with Strife, if you learn how to like build him up, ideally, fairly quickly. And, once I did, the fight really wasn't too bad, largely leveraging the level 1s, leaving him stay unblockable for most part of the time, then building up whatever I had to build up and, you know, stacking in with a level 3. Fairly simple, but again, you want to KO yourself when Luke Cage has a couple % health left, and then I KO'd him with Professor X. Now, if you're not running Liquid Courage Double Edge, obviously you can use Professor X for this entire fight, and if you're skilled with Professor X, you can even solo it, and then change the masteries and put Liquid Courage Double Edge on. Entirely up to you. But I also figured it was a fairly good place to ramp up Strife. Alternatively, you can ramp up Strife on Old Man Logan later after you have done the shenanigans with Apocalypse. But the point is that for me, this was Magneto, finish with Professor X, Strife, finish with Professor X. And you don't really need it much. Well, 1 revive maybe on Luke Cage, 2 revives, how well you play. Then against Old Man Logan is where we are doing all of our shenanigans here. Against Old Man Logan, I entered the fight with APOC, I quit it out, revived APOC, entered the fight with APOC, quit it out, revive APOC, and used the Horseman of Apocalypse pre-fight on this fight, and then entered the fight with Strife. And then again, if your Strife is not ramped up, you can ramp it up there, or you can just quit out and then solo the fight with Magneto, and that's it. Now, next fight's Havoc, and Havoc is a Colossus fight for me, but you can do that fight with Apocalypse as well if you really want. And that was like 1 revive with Colossus, and I quit out the fight just before the finish to get the last charge for Professor X and let all my mutants at this point have insane healing from Professor X Colossus synergy, and you don't need to pretty much use health potions after this point forward until the very boss fight. You really don't. You can save yourself so many health potions, which is why I did that. I also didn't boost the entire lane. So then we are going on to Dormammu. You can do this fight with Strife fairly easily. I think it is 1 or 2 shot and not too much to complain. And then you're moving on to your regular Joe Fixit fight, which was again Strife. I think 1 revive, maybe 2. Mordo was a solo with Strife. Then we have Venom the Duck, which is a fairly easy fight with Apocalypse. You just need to kind of slow play it a bit. Once you get your concussions on, he's not going to trigger his buffs often, and you can probably 2-shot the fight or maybe 3-shot the fight, something like that. And so it shouldn't take many revives. Now we have Howard the Duck. That is a 1-shot for Magneto. I have 1-shot it and passed with Magneto. This time I kind of choked a bit before the end, and it's not too bad. Now we have Hyperion Champion fights. Both of these are fairly finicky because of the Unstoppable and Power Gain. It took me several revives to figure out how to deal with Hyperion, and the answer there was to use Strife and pretty much only heavy attack, because that let me build up my charges quickly enough so I can deal with the Unstoppable whenever it appears. And thanks to me largely doing only mediums or heavy attacks, you can actually, it is a fairly slow fight, but because you conserve your hit count so much, then, you know, Hyperion actually was going down quite quickly, because ramped up Strife with heavy attacks, you know, it works out quite well. And against Champion, for whatever reason, Strife Unstoppable removal abilities weren't quite working as well. And for me, the best thing here was to use Apocalypse, get to level 2, use that level 2, and then get to level 3 just to lock in that concussion with a double strength. And afterwards you can build in the level 1 debuffs as well, why not? But the key importance there is to get your concussions on as quickly as possible, and then the fight becomes very, very manageable with Apocalypse. I didn't have much problems afterwards once I figured that out. And it's kind of, as I said, very significant portion of my revives for this run turned out to be just kind of learning curve, just to figuring out how to do these fights. That's why I recommend this guide to as many people as I can. Then Cyclops, I used personally APOC. You can probably use Strife as well. With APOC it worked very well, especially since whenever I messed up, I was healing all the time thanks to Liquid Courage Double Edge and the Professor X synergy. As I said, it's a very, very useful synergy, saving you so many times. Against Loki, I think it can be 2-shot with Strife, because the strategy there is to hold your block, reparry, and throw heavy attacks with the shock from level 1 active at all times, pushing Loki to level 2 because level 1s are much harder to deal with. So basically, for most part, I was holding the block up, reparried, dropped a medium heavy or just a heavy attack, and played it that way, conserving a lot of my hits. It's again a fairly slow fight, but because you're conserving hits, you can do a lot of damage in single revive. Then we have Aegon, who can be Strife, APOC solo. It's really not all that hard. APOC does still absolutely amazing here. Invisible Woman, APOC solo, not a problem. Cal, I recommend if your Magneto is still alive, bring in Magneto. I can probably solo. I kind of butchered it before the end, so I finished it off with Strife, but Magneto can solo this if you want, and then we have the boss fight. Again, for my particular team, I do think it is one of the better teams to use, especially if you want to conserve potions. Now, if you do not want to run Liquid Courage Double Edge, and if you want to rely more on Professor X, then we can take a look at some alternatives. So let's take a look at that, and we're going to be going to Aunt May. And instead of Cable Synergy, there are two kind of best case scenarios. Sorry, instead of Colossus Synergy, my bad. I think you can bring in either Archangel, or you can bring in Magneto House of X. I don't think Cable is necessary or worth bringing, because everything that Cable does in terms for APOC can be kind of replaced with 2 revives. I really don't think Cable is all that needed. Now, I do understand that he could potentially be useful for some of the fights on his own, but I really did not feel the need for him. I think the question, best case scenario here is, which champion do you bring instead Colossus? Do you bring in Archangel or Magneto House of X? I personally recommend Archangel more, because Archangel has a synergy with Professor X that will give all your champions quite significant power gain. And that power gain will let you do a lot more damage per fight, and perhaps solo some of the fights that you would come short with, but definitely would make playing a lot easier. And Archangel, especially if you maybe make him Horseman instead of Strife, or Archangel just with, you know, the synergies from Professor X and synergies from Apocalypse, would be an absolute beast for several of the fights himself. You'd probably make the champion fight significantly easier, and maybe a couple of other ones too. Alternatively, obviously, there is Magneto House of X, and Magneto House of X I recommend bringing in if you plan on using Professor X more than I did, in which case you obviously will not be running Liquid Courage Double Edge again, because of the synergy with Professor X and Apocalypse as well, but specifically Professor X, that allows Professor X increased buff duration, which is very, very, very helpful to maintain all the prowesses. So those are my recommendations. Now, what to do if you don't have Strife? I'm not entirely sure. I'd still probably rely on APOC and Archangel and Magneto as the main champions, even though that probably would get costlier. One good thing that I have heard outside of these standard champions being used, and I didn't realize that first, is Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde can save you a ton of revives against Collector, because most of the fight would be the cheese of you just spamming level 3s. Because he's gonna bypass the miss thing, and you know, you're gonna be doing all the cool shenanigans with Kitty Pryde whenever something bypasses miss. So I do think that overall APOC and APOC and Magneto and Professor X, and obviously perhaps Strife are kind of the MVPs. I do think you can do this without Strife, and I don't think it would be too painful, but I don't think I have the best strategy. So assuming if we don't have Strife, so this is Magneto fight, this is Professor X fight, this is Magneto fight, this can be APOC fight or anybody who doesn't do energy damages on base hits. Now this fight, who would you use for Dormammu if you don't have Strife? Yeah, who would you use for Dormammu then? That'd be an interesting question. Well, if you're bringing in Kitty Pryde for Collector, then Kitty Pryde could be an option. Or APOC, I guess. APOC and somewhat slow play. Degen still should work, shouldn't be too bad. Then we have Joe Fixit, which again, pretty much any champion kind of can do. Mordo, which, you know, can be dealt with APOC, for instance, or Kitty Pride. Then again, this one is still APOC anyways. This is Magneto fight. These can be, champion can be Archangel fight. Hyperion would definitely be a problematic fight. Hyperion, I don't even know what would be the best answer. Maybe Kitty Pride and eat the level 3s from Hyperion, trying to be invisible. Because Mutant class does not have good power control options. The Hyperion fight would be a pain again. I really don't know many great options there. Which again, probably would be a Kitty Pride, probably the best option. And then, you know, Loki can be done, I don't know, with Archangel or whoever. Cyclops can be done with anyone. Kal can be a bit lengthy, but done with anyone. That can be Archangel fight. So I do think that Archangel is kind of like a champion that you really do want with you if you're not running Strife. That more or less is the best advice that I can give you. Again, if you want to see how many revives I used and stuff like that, then just know that I definitely could have used at least a third less, because I was learning a lot and I was pushing through quite tired, because I was streaming for like 12 plus hours, like 2 days in a row. But I ended up using this 13, 29, 51 single ones and 3 team ones. Yeah, but it definitely could have been under 30 revives. If I knew all the things that I do now, I do believe that I could get through under 30 revives. Or maybe 35. Right, that being said, I do hope that this video has been helpful. If you have any more questions you think I might be able to answer, please ask your questions. And I will see you guys next time. Thank you. Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about